Hey guys, how are you all doing? This is the MMA breakdown with my predictions for UFC 167 GSP versus Hendricks. Very excited for this card, especially for the main event, and the pay-per-view main card is really good, and also some really good fights on the prelim card. So let's get into this, and I'll go through all the fights and give you my predictions and thoughts. On the online prelim card, first fight, light heavyweight, Gian Villante versus Cody Donovan. Villante in his last fight, he had that really bizarre fight with Ovince St. Preux, where he got poked in the eye, and the ref asked him if he could see, he said no, and the fight was stopped. I haven't seen him fight outside of that fight. Don't really know much about him. Cody Donovan, on the other hand, he's had a few fights in the UFC. I really liked his UFC debut where he took on Nick Penner and knocked him out. And then his last fight against OSP, he was actually doing all right, using some clinch work, pressing him up against the fence, landing a few shots in the clinch, but eventually just got taken down by OSP, and the power was too much, got knocked out with a few big ground and pound shots. But I like Donovan. Villante, I know he's from Strikeforce. I think he's had some experience there. Let me see who he's fought. Trevor Smith, also Lorenz Larkin, and Chad Griggs. He's had a few wins over guys I don't know. But I feel like Villante should be more favored because of the Strikeforce experience, and Donovan's still pretty green, and he's only had a few UFC fights. But I want to take Donovan here. I think he's a kind of a headhunter, looks for the knockout. I think he's just more exciting than Villante, at least from what I've seen. So I'm going to go with Cody Donovan. I'll say decision just to be safe, but maybe a knockout. But yeah, I don't know. Villante, he could win too, and I wouldn't be surprised. Next up, Will Campuzano versus Sergio Pettis. This was supposed to be Von Lee versus Sergio Pettis. I would have much rather see that fight. Campuzano, I believe this guy had a few fights in the UFC several years ago. I think he fought Nick Pace. He fought Nick Pace and Chris Carriasso right after the WC was absorbed into the UFC. But since he's been on a 5-fight win streak, it looks like nobody I'm familiar with. But I just have to go with Sergio Pettis. Just because of the hype, just because of the name. Training with his brother, I'm sure he's getting some great training. You can't be training with anyone better than the world champ and a guy like Pettis, who's so talented. Sergio Pettis, I think this is a big deal, and I really hope Pettis can, be an elite fighter in the UFC. I think that would be great for the sport, to have two brothers like that in the UFC competing at a high level. Never really been done before. The Miller brothers. Jim Miller's been he's been an elite fighter. He was at one point, but Dan Miller wasn't. Pretty big skill gap between them. But I'm excited for this. I want to see what Pettis can do. I've never seen any of his other fights. I think I've seen a few highlights here and there. But yeah, Campuzano's just been out of the UFC for so long. And Pettis, let me look at Pettis' record here. He's on a big win streak, it looks like. What is this? 9 or 10 fight win streak. Yeah, 9 fights. He's got submission and knockouts. Yeah, I'm going with Pettis. I don't know, let's say submission or knockout, but I think he's going to take this. Next up at welterweight, Jason High versus Anthony Lapsley. Jason High, he impressed me in his last fight against, what's that guy's name? the guy who beat Brian Ebersol, Jim Head, James Head. I was impressed with Jason High in that fight. Submitted James Head with a guillotine choke, took him down, and then locked up a guillotine, rolled with it. But before that, he was ran through by Eric Silva. Anthony Lapsley, yeah, he's on a 4-fight win streak. Not familiar with him, but I'll go with High. He's had the UFC experience and has a win in the UFC, so I'll go with High. He seems like a decent wrestler, decent grappler, so High. Now moving on to the Fox Sports 1 prelim card. This is a really good prelim card. A lot of good fighters here, a lot of returning fighters, a lot of fighters who need wins. But first off, at bantamweight, Eric El Goyito Perez versus Edwin Figueroa. Eric Perez, he was on that real hot win streak, although I think he was a bit overrated because he was fighting just cans in that win streak. And his last fight against Mitsugaki, lost the fight, but it was a really tough fight. He made it really competitive. He was in there the whole time. Mitsugaki just kind of wore him down over time. I think he got discouraged, but the guy's really good boxing. He's kind of a good scrambler. Good, good scrambler. I believe in that fight against Mitsugaki, he was taken down a few times, but I seem to remember him doing okay with the counter wrestling. But he's a tough guy, scrappy striker. And he has some submissions and knockout power, as we've seen in his other fights. Edwin Figueroa, though, this guy's been pretty good. He is coming off of 2 losses. His last fight against Francisco Rivera got knocked out, and then before that lost a decision to Roland Delorme in a really back-and-forth fight that I was actually really surprised by. I thought that he was going to have a much easier time with Delorme. But this guy's shown real fast hands, good power, especially for a bantamweight. Remember when he fought Bruce Leroy, Alex Caceres, knocked him down a few times. The guy's vicious striking, but he has had those slip-ups against Rivera and Delorme. And I think Perez, he has good striking. I don't think he'll have quite the speed that Figueroa has or the pure power, but this is a tough fight. This is a tough one to call. I think it's pretty close. I'm going to side with Perez just because of the low losing streak that Figueroa's been on, and Perez, I think he has more room to grow, and he's training at Jackson's. He's still really young. I could see Figueroa catching him, though, just having the faster hands, bigger power. But Perez, he's been more versatile, I think. Tough fight. Gosh, I want to take Figueroa, but I'm going to go with Perez. I think he edges it out somehow. Decision. Next up, a fight I'm really excited for. One of, for me, one of the most intriguing fighters, and a guy I loved watching when he was fighting in the UFC, coming back from a long layoff. Brian Ebersol versus Rick Story at welterweight. The Harrow, the return of the Harrow. I really loved when this guy came into the UFC. I remember he fought UFC 127, stepped in for Carlos Condit against Chris Lytle. Never heard this guy. Never heard of him. I thought that Lytle was going to smash him, and he just took it to Lytle, dominated him. That was a really exciting fight. And after that, I remember him smashing Dennis Hallman. And there was that whole thing where Hallman was wearing those really skinny trunks. It was basically he was wearing like briefs in the cage, and Ebersol smashed him. And then after that, he fought Claude Patrick, decisioned him. he was undefeated and since he came to the UFC. Also had a great fight against TJ Waldberger. But then he wasn't undefeated. I'm sorry. His last fight, he lost to James Head. It wasn't a domination though. He was in that fight, but this guy's so unorthodox, does just bizarre, weirdo stuff. I remember against James Head, he was on his knees throwing double hammer fists to James Head's knees. To his legs, he was throwing those double hammer fists from his knees. He does the cartwheel kick. Real unorthodox guy, just hard to get a hold of. His opponents. He's just so tricky. He's got decent wrestling. He's got real good submission defense. We saw that in the Waldberger fight. He was put in a triangle several times there, and he just stays very calm and composed. He was nearly choked out with a Darce choke in that fight. Also, managed to survive that. This real kind of tricky, elusive guy. Story, I think he's had his time in the UFC. He had his short run of success, culminating with his win over Thiago Alves. But since then, it's just been very inconsistent. He's been win one, lose one. Especially in his last fight against Pyle. He knocked him down with a big shot, but wasn't able to really capitalize on that for the rest of the fight and kind of faded towards the end. I have to go with Ebersol here, even though he's coming off of it's like a 1.5 year layoff. I think he's just going to be better for Rick Story. They're both wrestlers. Rick Story more of a traditional kind of wrestler, but Ebersol's a good grappler. Rick Story, I don't think he has a submission game to beat Ebersol. And then on the feet, Rick Story definitely has more power, but Ebersol, he throws the unorthodox stuff, and I think he'll be looking to get this to the ground, make it a grappling match. I'm going to go with Ebersol by decision. And I just really liked watching the guy fight because he's so different and interesting, but I really hope he can, win this fight and put together another streak here. And Rick Story, I think he's kind of fading into irrelevancy. Next up, middleweight Ed Short Fuse Herman versus Talis Leites. Ed Herman in his last fight decisioned Trevor Smith in a back and forth brawl. I didn't feel Herman really got the better of it. It was just very close, very back and forth. And then Talis Leites in his last fight pretty much dominated Tom Watson, both on the feet and on the ground, in his return to the UFC. Ed Herman's a really good grappler, though. If it goes to the ground, I don't think Leites, will easily dominate him there. I was really impressed with Ed Herman's streak a few years ago, making his return. I think he had an injury or something, but he knocked out Tim Crater, and then in the fight against Kyle Noak, he showed really good jiu-jitsu, got an inverted heel hook, and he was working his guard real well in that fight. He was attacking with arm bars from both sides at the same time. He was locking up both arms and showed a really good guard in that fight. And then choked out Clifford Starks in a tougher fight after that. But then since then, he had the loss to Jake Shields. Got submitted by Souza when he took a fight in Strikeforce. Has been on a little bit of a slide, but he did rebound with the win over Trevor Smith. He's got tenacious stand-up, kind of scrappy. He's got power on occasion. I think he'll have. I think his striking will be more effective against Leites, and but the ground though, I can't see Leites giving him trouble. But Ed Herman also has a really good ground game, so I'm going to go with Ed Herman. I think he'll win a decision here. Next up, a lightweight Donald Cowboy Cerrone versus Evan Dunham. I've said this before. Donald Cerrone, this guy was incredible. He was an elite guy, a contender, all that. Had an amazing run coming into the UFC. I think he won like 4 fights in a row. especially his performances against Charles Oliveira. Just he was the first guy to really run through Oliveira when he was on, had a lot of hype behind him. His win against Dennis Seaver also, just tooling him in the first round, knocking him down with a head kick and then choking him out. This guy was so good. And then even after his loss against Nate Diaz, had some good wins. Jeremy Stevens, and then I was really blown away by the fight against Gallard. But ever since after that fight, lost to Pettis, just got ran through. He's never been the same since. You saw it in the KJ Noons fight. I mean, he should have destroyed KJ Noons. This guy's got great kickboxing, great power, and a real nasty submission game. But against Noons, he just looked flat, looked like he didn't want to be there. And same thing against Dos Anjos. Looked pretty bad against Dos Anjos. I thought just it looked like the fire was gone. I think his head is not in fighting. I just think he's lost the desire. Looks really flat. Last few fights have been very uninspirational. And normally a few years ago, I would have picked him to handle Dunham pretty easily. But Dunham, I'm taking Dunham here. He's still scrappy. He doesn't have nearly the toolbox that Cerrone does, but this guy does have the fire, and you see that in all his fights. Even though I think he's kind of, I think he was on the rise more a few years ago, and he's kind of, tapered off. He's kind of been relegated to just kind of the mid-tier opponents now, but Evan Dunham's real scrappy. He gave TJ Grant a great fight. That was back and forth. He could have easily won that. Gleison Tebow, he beat him. And then against Dos Anjos, that was a pretty uneventful fight, although that was also a very close fight. So Evan Dunham never really dominated. He doesn't really dominate guys either, but he's always scrappy, always fights with a lot of heart. I think he'll pressure Cerrone a lot like Dos Anjos did, stay in his face, and I don't think he'll give any room for Cerrone to get off. So I'm taking Dunham here. I think Cerrone's done. I read somewhere that he wants to drop to featherweight after this. Yeah, that just tells me, he knows he needs to rejuvenate his career somehow. But, I think he's just mentally gone, and I think Dunham will take this by decision. Now moving on to the main card. First fight at flyweight, Tim Elliott versus Ali Bagatinov. Tim Elliott had the fight against Dodson, which I actually scored it for him. I thought he won. It was, pretty close. Neither guy had a clear advantage. And then he beat Jared Papazian, and most recently beat Louis Goodnight Gaudino. The guy's got good grappling. He's not huge, but he's a good size for flyweight. Just kind of scrappy. Really showed good grappling against Gaudino, but doesn't seem to have much finishing ability. Ali Bagatinov, on the other hand, coming off of his UFC debut against Marcus Vinicius. This is a real small guy. I believe he's like 5'3". Let me see here. Oh, 5'4". But against Marcus Vinicius, he was really outsized, and Marcus Vinicius took him down early, and he just looked huge on top of him. Was really out grappling him. But then Bagatinov, when this guy got back to the feet, he blasted Bagatinov. I believe it was in the third round. It took him until the third round, yeah. But he eventually knocked him out. The guy's small, but he packs a big punch. I think he's a real exciting addition to flyweight. This is a good fight. Bagatinov, I think, will have the advantage in the power and the striking, but Elliott will have the grappling, I think. So, close fight. I'm going to go with Elliott, though. I think he'll be able to control more with the grappling. And Elliott's not bad on his feet. He's got some unorthodox stuff against John Dodson. He was trading like spinning kicks, or he was trying to match Dodson in that fight with kind of the unorthodox moves. But this is a fun fight. I think Elliott will get it done, though, but wouldn't be surprised if Bagatinov knocked him out. Next up, excuse excuse me, Josh Koscheck versus Tyron Woodley at welterweight. Koscheck, this is another one of those guys. He's been elite for a long time, but he's been on a steady decline ever since GSP, battered him and broke his orbital bone. Tyron Woodley, on the other hand, came into the UFC. Well, let's go back before that when he took on Nate Marquardt. People, when they talk about it now, they talk like make it sound like Marquardt totally dominated Woodley in the fight, and that wasn't the case at all. In that fight against Marquardt, Woodley dropped him a few times in the first round, and he was really taking it to Marquardt. That was really dangerous. He showed big power there, aggressive striking. Eventually, did get caught though by Marquardt and knocked out. But coming into the UFC. Had a great win, ran through Jay Huron real quickly, caught him with like a Superman punch, put him out. And then against Jake Shields, really weird. Jake Shields, he slowed that fight down. Woodley matched his slow pace, and, it just became a really slow, methodical kickboxing match. And Jake Shields basically just kind of, smothered him with his really slow kind of slow, boring style, and Woodley fought that way. It was really bizarre. I thought Woodley definitely had the power to put Shields out, but Woodley, he's still he's a lot younger than Koscheck. I believe he's still in his 20s. Well, he's 31, but a few years younger than Koscheck. I think he still has something left. Koscheck, on the other hand, especially in his last fight against Robbie Lawler, it was really bizarre. Couldn't take Lawler down, and Lawler sprawled, hit him with a few short shots, and Koscheck just kind of froze and ended up getting knocked out. Well, the fight was stopped, TKO, but I think Koscheck is just older, uninspired. Another guy who's kind of lost his fire, lost a bit of spring in his step. And Woodley, on the other hand, I think he's younger, more athletic. I think he will have the bigger power, and he also has good wrestling. I think he'll get it done. I'm going to go with Woodley. I'm going to go with Woodley by TKO. It's a bit of a stretch, but that's what I'm calling. I'll be pretty surprised if Koscheck comes out and he's able to win this fight in any fashion. Next up, Rory Aries McDonald versus Robbie Ruthless Lawler at welterweight. An amazing fight, a great fight. Robbie Lawler, as I just mentioned, just looked so impressive against Koscheck. This is a guy who, when he was in Strikeforce for several years at middleweight, had a lot of kind of really bad and kind of surprising, disappointing losses. He lost to Lorenz Larkin, lost to Tim Kennedy, but coming to the UFC, dropped down, taking on an elite guy like Koscheck and just destroying him. He finished Koscheck, and Koscheck hadn't been finished in several years at that point. Looked great. His takedown defense looked great. Just looked athletic, big, strong, powerful, everything. And then his next fight took on Bobby Volker. A big step down in competition, but still he was sharp. He was motivated for that, and took care of business like he should have against Volker. You landed some real good head kicks in that fight and knocked Volker out with head kicks. Rory McDonald, on the other hand, he's just been he's been incredible, except for his last fight against Jake Ellenberger. Got a lot of criticism for that, which he deserved, I think. Just used his jab to keep Ellenberger away from him. But his fights before that have all been pretty incredible. The fight against BJ Penn really showed his improved striking. He's putting together real good combinations. He's yet to show really knockout power. He did finish Mike Kyle a few years ago with ground and pound. Mike Pyle with ground and pound. Also finished Che Mills with ground and pound. So, the guy has good takedowns. Also, what other fight? Oh, Nate Diaz showed really good wrestling. The guy, he's an up-and-comer. You all, I'm sure, regard him very highly. Training with GSP at TriStar. He has gone away from his kind of leg sweeps, and he used to have a real good kind of judo game. Judo throws, leg sweeps, he used against Condit and used in his fight against Mike Guyman. He's kind of gone away from that a little bit. He's focusing more now on the striking, it seems like, in his last few fights. But the guy's real technical, and he's also got real good power and very ferocious when he turns it on. Again, not in his last fight, but before that, we've seen that aggression. He's not going to jab up Robbie Lawler, though. I mean, he might be effective with his jab, but Robbie Lawler's not going to be discouraged. He's going to be right in his face trying to knock him out. Lawler, I think, mentally, he's totally kind of reinvented himself. Mentally, at least, I think he's rejuvenated. I think he realizes he's got a chance to be a contender, challenge for the title now in the UFC. I think he's turned things around a lot, and I think he enjoys making the money. This guy comes with a big price tag, and he's been getting knockout bonuses and looking great in his last few fights. I just think he's in a really good place. But McDonald, this guy is young, very talented, very technical, and I do think McDonald's going to win the fight with his technique. His jab, I think his striking will be a little sharper than Lawler. Lawler will have the bigger power. I do think he can hurt McDonald in this fight. We saw in the Che Mills fight, McDonald had a little bit of trouble in the stand-up at first. That was a few years ago, though, and McDonald, I think, has improved a lot, especially in the fight against BJ Penn, showed great striking. I love to see Lawler knock him out. I do think he has a chance of that, but I have to go with McDonald. I think the wrestling and the technical striking will get it done. Next up, the co-main event, light heavyweight, Rashad Evans versus Chael Sonnen. I love Chael Sonnen. He is my favorite fighter ever, maybe second favorite ever, but really love this guy. Really got on the Chael Sonnen train after his fight with Nate Marquardt. Sonnen, though, in his last fight against Shogun, he had a lot of questions to answer. This was a guy who had gotten 2 big title shots. The rematch with Silva, he definitely earned that fight. He had to win 2 other fights before that to get there, but then got the Jones fight. Everybody thought this guy was just kind of there for show, kind of a spectacle fighter. But against Shogun, he showed, he's still working hard. He's still improving. He's still got something to offer, even though I believe he's 36. And Rashad Evans, on the other hand, he's looked pretty flat. Another guy who, I keep using this phrase, but it's fitting. I think he's lost his fire, not very inspired. Against Dan Henderson, he did look better than the fight against Little Nog. He was more active, landing more combinations. He did hurt Henderson at one point, but the fight against Little Nog was just terrible. He did nothing. Really showed that he didn't want to win that fight. He could have easily, gone for a knockout, but wasn't throwing much of anything in that fight. That was terrible. And I just think Evans, just go back 2 years ago to his performances against Ortiz and even the Phil Davis fight. He was really good, very dominant in that. But just doesn't fight with that same fire. He's not throwing big combinations. He's not going after it on the feet like he used to, and his wrestling game is not what it used to be. Sonnen, on the other hand, took out a real elite guy in Shogun, who admittedly was on the decline at that point, but Sonnen submitted him, and Shogun hadn't been finished since he was a champion. That's a big deal. Tells me that Sonnen still has a lot of passion. He's still got, big heart, big drive. And that, more than anything, is what I think is going to be the determining factor here, is Sonnen's heart. Stylistically, Evans, I think, will have a speed advantage. I think he'll be able to, get in on his shot on Sonnen, but I do think if it becomes a wrestling match, I do think Sonnen will be better there. I don't think Sonnen wants to let Evans get on top. Evans has shown in the Phil Davis fight he can get a crucifix position. He can land those short shots on top. Sonnen's a great wrestler. Rashad's not really a guy who wants to tie up, though. He's kind of more in and out, uses more movement. So it's going to be interesting to see if Sonnen, how easily he can get the takedown. We saw in the Shogun fight, Sonnen's a great wrestler, but his takedowns do not come as easily at light heavyweight as they did at middleweight. Shogun took him down at light heavyweight. Guys are bigger there. Evans, though, I don't know. I don't think he's going to be that much. I don't think he's going to be as big as Shogun was against Sonnen. And then on the feet, Evans obviously has the better hands, better power. But of late, again, he hasn't been that active on the feet. Doesn't throw a lot of stuff. I think he will be quicker with the hand speed. But, Sonnen, he's just kind of a scrappy boxer. Gets in your face. Doesn't have big power. But, he survives there. I think this is just going to be a battle of heart, and Sonnen, he's shown that he still has it. Evans hasn't, so I have to go Sonnen. I think he'll win a decision, but a close competitive fight. I think Sonnen can get it, though. And also, I didn't mention Sonnen's submission offense. We saw it in his last fight against Shogun, saw it in his fight against Stan. I think... I don't think Evans is going to be as easy to submit as those other guys for Sonnen, but that's still a weapon he has, and we've seen Evans, Tito Ortiz in their rematch, he went for a guillotine. That I'm just saying that's another avenue Sonnen might look to take, but I do think Sonnen's heart will prevail here. Now for the main event, GSP versus Johnny Big Rig Hendricks. Amazing fight. Really, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Now, let me say here, I've followed Hendricks' UFC career from the beginning. I started watching UFC. UFC 100 was the first event I watched, and Hendricks fought at 101, took on Amir Sadallah. Looked great in that fight, just ran through him, immediately showed his knockout power. He was on the main card, I believe, in that fight. Let me check it here. Okay, no, that wasn't the main card. Sorry. Oh yeah, no, it was he was on the main card there. So yeah, his first fight in the UFC, they put him on the main card. He takes out the Ultimate Fighter winner. Good stuff. Showed good power in there. But then that power went away for a little bit, and then they buried this guy on the prelim cards for his next several fights, which I didn't understand at all. He fought Ricardo Funch, decision him. He had a fight against TJ Grant, and that was actually a pretty close fight, and I thought he could have lost that fight. It was really close. Basically used his takedowns to get the decision, but he was having some trouble on the feet in that fight. Fought Charlie Brenneman, knocked him out in the first round, showed his big power again, and then they put him on the main card, the Ultimate Fighter 12 finale against Rick Story, and that was his only loss ever. Rick Story was just quicker on the feet, quicker to the punch, put combinations together better than Hendricks. But then Hendricks has been on a great winning streak since then. Knocked out TJ Waldberger after that. Then fight Mike Pierce, where I thought he showed his most diverse striking game. He was using knees and kicks in that fight. He looked really good. Then against John Fitch, and since then just took it to another level. Knocked out John Fitch. The Koscheck fight was actually really close. If you go back and watch that fight, that could have gone Koscheck's way easily. But tough fight. He didn't really get dominated. He had his moments in there. but then destroyed Martin Kampmann, and Carlos Condit reeled back and forth, dangerous fight. He survived there and got the win. Now, I'm sorry for taking all that time to recap his career, but you know, this guy, he can win. He can win in different ways. You know, he's shown the big KO power and KOing really, you know, good guys. Maybe not guys with the best chins, but elite guys. John Fitch and Martin Kampmann, just blowing through them. That's incredible. And then he can win real drawn out, gritty fights. He can get, you know, he can fight to a decision. Saw that against Carlos Condit, against Josh Koscheck. This guy doesn't get discouraged if he can't land that big punch. Things might not go his way, it might get ugly, but you know, he can use his wrestling to, you know, win the fight if it goes the distance. Now, I just want to say that because I think that's important against GSP. You know, guys like Condit, who fought GSP before, they rely on their striking. They don't have the wrestling game that Hendricks does. They do get discouraged if, you know, they're not landing, if they're not having success in the striking early on. Condit, though, in that fight, he was getting pretty thoroughly dominated. He's hanging in there, but getting beat up, and he was still able to land that big shot on GSP, nearly put him out. Hendricks, I think, you know, while his attack is more basic, he's got that big hand. I do think he, you know, more so than the other guys GSP has fought, he has that, you know, one-shot ability to end the fight with one shot. Even if Pierre takes him down early on, you know, kind of, you know, drags it into the third, fourth, and so on, those rounds, I think, you know, Hendricks, he's still going to be, you know, looking for that big shot, and I still think he'll have that power all the way through those rounds. We've never really seen Hendricks gas. He's got a good tank. And if this turns into a wrestling match, and it could very, you know, that could very well happen. You know, GSP likes to grapple. This turns into a wrestling match. I think Hendricks can do it. You know, I do think he will take GSP down. I think we'll see GSP on his back more than we've ever seen him. Although in the Koscheck fight, you know, Hendricks was put on his back and really couldn't do anything. Now, that was 2 years ago. But, and then also against Condit, we saw him struggle when he was on top. But Pierre doesn't have the guard that Condit does. Well, I'm trying to say, you know, Hendricks is really well-rounded, you know, as far as, you know, he's got the big KO power and he has wrestling as well. Pierre, you know, very technical. He's got that great jab against a dangerous striker like Condit. He's really able to stifle him and dominate him in the striking. And against another guy who had big, you know, he didn't have the power or the, you know, the knockout performances that Hendricks had, Josh Koscheck. But he's still a guy who was thought of as a lethal, you know, power striker, and Pierre just totally, you know, he totally stifled his, you know, his striking with the jab. I feel like, you know, Hendricks, because he has, you know, been relying on that left hand, I do think that will make it a little easier for GSP to land the jab. But, you know, Hendricks has heart, and we saw in that Condit fight in that first round, he just basically ran across the cage, and all he did was just throw that left hand over and over again. Didn't even, you know, mix in other strikes. Didn't use his right hand. He was just throwing that left hand over and over again, charging at Condit. If he does something like that to Pierre, you know, I think he can put him down. It's gonna be a tough fight. GSP, you know, he's been incredible. I'll admit it. He's been very boring. I don't enjoy watching him fight most of the time. I did think his fight against Condit, though, people don't give him enough credit for. You know, that was a big kind of turnaround from his previous fights, especially coming off the layoff. He really took it to Condit and looked like he was really trying to finish, really beat him up, and, you know, was really going for the kill in that fight. Against, you know, Nick Diaz, kind of went back to his old kind of, you know, going through the motions kind of style. But Hendricks, he's young, very motivated. He's had incredible performances. Again, he can knock you out in the first round, or he can, he can survive a very back and forth fight that, where he struggles a bit, and he's still, still fighting hard to the last minute. So I am going to go with Hendricks. I would not be surprised if he knocked out GSP. I mean, it would be incredible because it's, hasn't happened in so long. But I do think he has the power to do that, and I do think he's tough enough where he won't get discouraged if he's taken down, if he gets jabbed up for a bit. Just look at the last fight with Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz was getting pretty thoroughly worked over, and I believe it was like the second or third round near the end, he ripped a few shots to the body, tagged GSP a little bit, and I think Hendricks is way tougher than Nick Diaz. I definitely think I'm picking Hendricks, either by decision or KO. I'm going to go with decision just because, GSP, you can't count out that technical strike. And he has great timing with that leap-in jab, step-in jab, and then every once in a while he'll throw the cross behind it. GSP's been incredible, but I think Hendricks is the guy. I do. So I'm taking Hendricks. But anyway, those are my predictions for UFC 167, GSP versus Hendricks. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like the video. Comment with your thoughts on this card, or if you want to challenge me on any of my picks. Please subscribe. Really appreciate it. But thank you guys for watching. Take care. I'll see you later. And I'll have my review for this next week after the event takes place. So, come back. Be on the lookout for that. So I'll see you guys later. Take care.